The Formula One USA Grand Prix just finished up, and I'm here to go over all of the key moments from the race, starting with the very first lap. All I'm going to say before we get into it is I have picked the last three race winners correct since I've started this channel, so, not just saying, but anyway. Race starts, obviously that big turn one, it can go almost 5 or 6 cars wide. Norris started in first with Max behind him. Norris, again, like the sprint race yesterday when he got attacked by the Ferraris, could not defend the turn one. He tried to take the inside. Max went even farther inside. They both went wide into turn one. It kind of looked like Max forced them off, but they are usually pretty lenient with that first lap. If some people go wide and they go wheel to wheel and go wide, they were not lenient the rest of the race. A lot of people had issues and got penalties because of overtaking and forcing other people off tracks, specifically around turn 12. But we'll get to that. So they go into turn one. Norris defends Max. Max takes the inside of Lando and goes past him. But at the same time, because Lando has to be off track at this point, Leclerc goes ahead of them both. Sainz slots in behind Max, and Lando goes all the way from first to fourth in the first turn, and Leclerc goes all the way from fourth up to first. And long story short, he did not lose that lead the rest of the race. Sainz made a few attempts after at Max, but he pushed him off after a bit and couldn't get the overtake. And after the first couple of laps, Sainz didn't really have much of a chance to get past Max at that point. Leclerc had a gap about 1.5 seconds after just one lap, with Sainz close behind Max. Lap 3, Leclerc had a lockup at the same time as Hamilton beached it and got his race finished there. He went off, and I think it was turn 11, I want to say. He yeah, just I don't know whether he hit the inside curb or something, just took a little bit too much speed, but beached it on lap 3, and that ended his race. He was starting from the back of the grid anyway because of his poor qualifying yesterday, and George Russell also started from the pit, and Hamilton was in 19th or 20th, so they both started from the back. George Russell had a much better day than Hamilton, but Hamilton had a pretty cursed weekend. He was not happy all weekend, and it kind of was fitting that it ended that quickly. At least he didn't have to go through the whole race like that, but would have been nice if he got to do what George Russell did, who you can see here ended up in 6th place. So lap 3, Norris is crying on the radio during the safety car about the start, and he just keeps coping because he can't get a clean start. I mean, it's hard to get a good start there going into turn 1 because you can go so wide, and unless you just get such a good jump that nobody's next to you, it's almost impossible not to have some kind of wheel-to-wheel action in that first turn. So off the restart here of the safety car, Max had a really good jump and closed up that gap to Leclerc, but that was the closest he got for the rest of the race. Leclerc, by the end of the safety car restart lap, had a 1.2 gap behind, and Sainz was staying close to Max, about zero point 0.7 behind. He was staying within that range, within striking distance, but couldn't quite get by. Lap 9, Sainz actually started reporting no power in the corners, and it was evident that that was happening because he was dropping back behind Max tenths at a time in a lot of corners in only 2 laps. So they got a fix for him eventually for that, but he did lose a little bit of race time because of that. He came back on the radio right after and said that it smells like fuel in the car, and it almost seemed like he was going to have to DNF and Norris was going to move up, take a spot, but they gave him a fix. I guess the fuel smell was nothing, and they moved on, and he ended up having a great race, and wasn't an issue, but almost seemed like it was going to be the end of his race as well. Lap 10, Guan Yu Zhou spun out into turn 1 and took his usual spot back as the back marker for the rest of the race. Lawson and Alonso kept their feud going for the weekend, and they were switching back and forth in the early laps around 10, 11, 12. By lap 13, Leclerc was 5 seconds ahead and increasing his lead, with Sainz at this point 1.6 behind Max, and Lando another 3 seconds behind Sainz. Russell overtook Bottas and had to push him off in 14th, which he ended up in the turn 14, which ended up getting a penalty for. So he got a penalty for that. There was at least 3 or 4 penalties for overtaking and pushing people off, but Red Bull told Max over the radio there's some kind of issue around this time as well, lap 15, and that they would fix it in the pits. Not really sure what it was. Didn't seem to make that big of a deal, but Red Bull definitely didn't have as much pace today as they did yesterday. So whatever changes were made between the sprint race and now seemed not to favor Red Bull. Lap 17, Perez finally got past Yuki into P8. The pit window here was around lap 19, and most started on the mediums and went to the hards for the remainder of the race. By lap 19, Leclerc was up over 8 seconds in front of Max, and Sainz was staying just under 2 seconds behind Max. Alonso was just getting bullied in the midfield today. Aston Martin was not looking good. Stroll was doing his normal window, looking towards the bottom, but Alonso was getting bullied by Lawson, Colapinto. A lot of these midfield guys were just going back and forth with him, and he couldn't really do much to defend. So Lap 20, Sainz pits, tries to undercut Max, and it was a successful undercut. By lap 24, Leclerc was up 10 seconds, and Norris was closing the gap behind to Max. Max pits on lap 26 for the hards for his one stop. Not a bad stop, but not great. And like I said, Sainz did have a successful undercut, so he overtook him before Max even hit the pit exit line. Max with another 5 laps or so. Oh, that's not going to matter. Okay. Leclerc also pitted in lap 26, had a good stop just like Sainz, and came out with no issues. Lando stayed a couple extra laps out, pitted on lap 20 or lap 32, so he had about a 6-second tire 6-lap tire advantage for the rest of the race to Max, and that did come into play, but it ended up not mattering because they kind of fucked themselves over, which we'll get to that. It was pretty crazy all the way through, but it got really interesting towards the end when Lando started getting close to Max. So lap 32, Piastri pitted following lap, and the Ferraris got their 1-2 positioning back, inheriting that after Piastri pitted. Gasly and Yuki both got 5-second penalties for overtakes. Those were the second and third time that happened during the race. Just for forcing off and overtakes. Lando started pushing right away and cut the gap to Max to 4.6 by lap 36. Lap 37, right after, Max is raging on the radio. The tires weren't good. It seemed like everybody was having a lot more issues on the hards than the mediums, but Max particularly was not happy about it. Lando was closing the gap quick behind him, and we knew it was going to be evident that they were going to be battling at some point. Lawson pitted around this time as well, lap 37, and came out ahead of Yuki, which he was not happy about either, and he started fucking raging too, and made them answer him about what happened and this and that, but not a good look for Yuki. Lawson then, as soon as he came back out ahead of Yuki, got ahead of Gasly right after, and put himself in the points into P10. Lap 41, Yuki probably trying to do a little bit too much, spun into turn 1, dropped down into 14th place. That was essentially his race done, and you can see there he finished in 14th as well. Lap 44, Lando got within DRS, and it was almost time for attack. 3 laps later, lap 47, it was his first attack into turn 12. Max was defending hard, and Lando could not complete the first attempt. They went around a couple of corners wheel to wheel, and Max held him off. Lap 48, Max fended him off again, very defensive, and right away, the next lap in to turn 1 on lap 49, tried again. Lap 50, turn 1, tried again. Couldn't get past. Lap 51, Lando just barely couldn't get around. It was clean racing, nothing crazy at this point. Good defense. Finally, on lap 52, Lando got the overtake, but got it off the road. Max had the inside, Lando was on the outside. Max stayed on the track, Lando was all 4 off, and they ended up giving him the penalty at the end of this race for gaining an advantage off the track. At this point, McLaren could have decided to give him the position back, and they wanted to, be little babies like they tend to be and say, no, we're right. We're not going to give it back, even though every single person that has done this and overtook off the track and gained an advantage today has been penalized, and they just wanted to be right instead of doing what was probably the better idea. At this point, they had a little bit of time to possibly overtake again, and yeah, they decided to throw it away instead. I mean, that was lap 52. There's 56 laps. They had a couple other chances, and he was up Max's ass. I mean, if he would have just strategically given the spot back and just kept going, I'm sure he could have had at least another couple of chances. They decided not to give it back, and right before Leclerc finished off the race, they gave him the 5-second penalty. They were coping hard. Obviously, Max was calling for the penalty. McLaren saying, no, you were ahead at the apex, da-da-da. He 100% wasn't ahead at the apex. They both had to go wide, but I think Max kept at least one wheel on, and Lando did not, and just kept the spot after that. So, yeah, that was the end of the race. Ferrari held their 1-2 pretty much the entire race. They were dominant today. They were good in the sprint race yesterday. You could see they had really good pace. They had probably the best tire degradation on the grid. George Russell, really good recovery race, starting from the pit to get up into P6. I'm sure they were expecting something similar out of Lewis, especially somebody that's always so good at this track, and that's all you hear coming into the weekend, how good Lewis is at this track, and then he shits the bed in the qualifying and the race. So not great. Like I said, Lando got his 5-second penalty right before the end of the race. Could have just given him the position back, but they wanted to be little babies instead. But really good race all the way through. Pretty good action. Final grid here, we'll read it out, 1 through 19. Charles Leclerc gets the win. Carlos Sainz in second. Ferrari go 1-2. Max Verstappen takes third place ahead of Lando Norris, gaining 3 points on his World Drivers' Championship advantage. Oscar Piastri comes through in fifth ahead of George Russell 6th. Perez in seventh. Not a bad race for him. Nico Hulkenberg in 8th, ahead of Lawson, scoring 2 points in his first race. Good for him. And Colapinto in 10th, also scoring points. So Albon doesn't score, and what's his fuck? Sonoda doesn't score, but both the young guys do. So good for them. Good race for the young guys today. A lot of overtaking opportunities, and they just kept it consistent and had really good pace, obviously. So K Mag gets bumped out of the points into 11th. Pierre Gasly 12th. He had a pretty good weekend to start, but dropped out of the points pretty rapidly in the race. So not a great race for him. Alonso 13th. He was getting bullied in the midfield and only placed ahead of Yuki Tsunoda in 14th because of that lockup towards the end, or the spin out towards the end. Lance Stroll licking windows down to 15th. Albon in 16th. I think he had to have like an emergency pit or something. I feel like something went weird with his strategy. I'm not really sure what happened there. Valerie Bottas in 17th, Ocon in 18th, Bum, and your backmarker Guan Yu Zhou in 19th. The only one to not finish the race, Lewis Hamilton, who left his car in the beach and went out early. So, yeah, tough weekend for him. He had the worst weekend for sure. And Charles Leclerc and Ferrari, man, really good weekend for them. They decided not to go for the upgrades they had planned. They decided to put them off, and it seemed to work out for them. McLaren opted to go for the upgrades, and I don't know that you can say it didn't work out for them because who knows? You know, it's one of those situations where if they don't put any upgrades, they might lose 5 seconds, and if they put new upgrades, they might gain 2 seconds or lose 1 second. You know, it could be. It's just a weird situation with upgrades sometimes, especially when in McLaren's case they've been running that floor since their first win like 12 races ago in Miami. So it's a tough decision to make. Red Bull opted for the new parts. They obviously benefited from that, placing ahead of McLaren. Perez in the top 10 obviously benefited a bit from that, and Ferrari decided to not go with the upgrades and took the benefit as well. So, kind of split strategy on that shit across the grid, and it had mixed results. So it'll be interesting going the next week in Mexico. I will be here for my predictions sometime early this week, and depending on the times, we'll probably be live for some of the sessions too. So look out for that in that predictions video. Like the video if you like the video, subscribe. I'll be back this week with more F1 content going into Mexico. Peace.